Yeah, hello everybody, and welcome to this Society of Floating Solutions Singapore webinar event. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Stefan Hübner from NUS, National University of Singapore, and I'm also the president of the society, and I will moderate today's event. We also have Charles Lim, our third vice president, with us, who will also help a bit with moderating. The topic of today's talk are floating farms with integrated multitrophic aquaculture. And we are very honored to welcome today's presenter, Christopher Leow. Christopher is the host of Growing Wild, which is a Channel News Asia documentary series investigating innovative solutions for sustainable food systems. 3 of the episodes constitute Project Castaway. This is the construction of the floating farm for multitrophic aquaculture. He's also the founder of The Freestyle Farmer, an urban farming education initiative that empowers communities to grow food creatively in cities. The topic is highly timely, in my opinion, as it addresses pressing issues such as climate change adaptation and sustainable food production. It explores the integration of multiple species across different trophic levels, whose combination generates synergy effects. The construction of floating structures also plays a central role, and the design underwent some drastic changes over time, as you can see in the episodes. Yeah, the team not only included Christopher, but also multiple students from NUS and ITE. And before we start, a few administrative remarks. Christopher will first give his talk, which is about 30 minutes, which is then followed by the Q&A session. Later, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box, which I then read out on your behalf, or you use the Zoom raise hand function. In that case, I will call you up so you can ask your question yourself. Christoph is also fine if you have a really pressing question that you interrupt him, so to speak, and then ask for some additions to what he said. Moreover, we are recording this talk, as you noticed when you joined, and depending on some quality control later, and obviously Christopher's permission, we will consider uploading it to YouTube. So you can recommend to friends who couldn't make it because of the time difference, for example, to Europe, if you want to do that. So Christopher, we are very happy and grateful to have you with us today and to hear more about your innovative projects. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Professor. I am very, very happy to be here. And I just want to preface by saying that I am not an expert on this topic. And some of you might probably know a lot more about floating farms. I'm just really here to share my journey and learnings from this past 1 year of working on this project. So without further ado, can you all see my screen? Okay, great.
It's not yet in presenter mode, but I think you're moving there. Yeah, now it is. Okay, wonderful.
Wait, sorry, did I?
Now it's fine. Now it's fine.
Yeah, okay.
Delay, I think.
Okay, so that's like the 3 main areas I'm going to be talking about is the background of the project and myself. The second thing is about the concept design, like how did I come about with the idea of it and the journey on how it became the actual build. And third, I think the most important thing is the learnings that I've had throughout this journey. So a bit about me, my background is in agriculture, urban agriculture. So I've been mostly focused on urban farming in Singapore, teaching people how to grow their own food. And I was also a chef before. So a lot of it is about how and what people eat and how it's all interconnected, right? So I was fortunate to be hosting this documentary on Channel News Asia. We have had 3 seasons. So the first season was about bringing people closer to nature. Second season was about finding the culture in agriculture. And then third season is Project Castaway. So personal motivation, why am I doing water stuff when I'm all into farming? Like I was previously a naval diver during my NS time. When I was studying overseas, I spent a lot of time foraging for my own fish, fishing, spearfishing, surfing. So I think the water was a very big part of my like the last 10 years of getting very connected to nature. And after doing a few seasons of Growing Wild, I felt like this was an area that was like always at the back of my head, and I wanted to explore it through this documentary. So the two big challenges that I look at with relation to like global events and how it relates to water and farming, first is the rising sea levels. So a lot of our land that will be affected in the region, you can look at the whole of Southeast Asia, like all the areas that are colored. So what's going to happen is that like low-lying areas that are producing crops for us, directly or indirectly, will be affected, right? So salinity is going to affect rice and a lot of our main staple crops, affecting our food security. And in Singapore, if we flood, right, assuming there is no mitigation, transportation from farms, from logistics, from airports could be affected as well. So our survival could also be affected. And then secondly, on the ocean front, with the warming seas, we are getting more acidification, coral bleaching. Basically, it could lead to the collapse of marine life and again, affecting food supply. Yeah, so big challenges. So in my very, rudimentary and simplistic thinking, I'm thinking, could we find a way to grow food to adapt to this new environment? It's going to be warmer, it's going to have more sea water, but like as a surfer, I know that the safest place is always like either above the water, or like sometimes I have to duck dive. You just go under where the waves crash, and it's very almost like it doesn't make sense sometimes, but like I was adopting that same like philosophy. Could it be growing food in a similar way? Could be the way forward. So doing my research on the internet, I came up with some examples or inspirations. This is in Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, there's like during heavy monsoon seasons, the fields flood, and they have come up with a way to use an invasive species of weeds called water hyacinth to make rafts, and they use these rafts as like floating mats to then grow the crops on. And during the dry seasons, like all this is just becomes normal farmland. So this was very smart, like nature-based solution that I seek inspiration from. And there are lots of floating communities around the world in Thailand and Cambodia. Yeah, people live life, trade, eat on small boats, and so it's very, very doable. And I was also very inspired by this TED talk by the architect and the group. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, K. Ingalls. And he had mentioned about his big oceanics like concept design of like modular floating pods. Yeah, and that was like super interesting. So we, after all, still had to do a documentary for the show, and there are certain like things we had to do. So the pitch or the main concept was to build a floating farm prototype to address growing food on water, talking about agriculture, and in water, so aquaculture. The project deliverables, we had 1 year to create a prototype. It had to be a physical prototype of a certain size. We had to work with students from NUS Landscape Architecture and ITE. These are mainly like personal contacts that I've gotten through my work in the industry. And I just felt like, these two groups would be an interesting fit because the lecturer from NUS Landscape Architecture was very much into like innovative urban solutions, and they also did explore built environment stuff, even like floating stuff. So I thought, hey, the students do have some ideas, and I would love to tap on that. And IT College East, because they have a fairly strong engineering, and agriculture team. So a lot of facilities that we could definitely tap into. And then at the end of this 1 year, we would then build this thing and then hand it over to the community wherever we would be launching this project. Okay, so the thing is we started like with no clue what we were doing, right? In Singapore, we don't have expertise in like agriculture, in floating agriculture. So we had to learn. So we traveled around the world in different countries like Netherlands, Portugal, Japan, and we learned from farmers, scientists, climate scientists, conservationists, fishermen, just to like piece together this whole conversation about the idea of adapting to rising sea levels. So I'm sharing some of the lessons here. One of them was in Portugal, where we learned that there are certain kinds of plants that have adapted to salty conditions. They literally can grow in salt water. In Portugal and parts of Europe, there are what we call salt marshes. So think of it similar to like mangroves in Southeast Asia. And a group of plants called halophytes, they basically like grow like weeds. They grow everywhere, and now they are commercialized in Portugal. You can find them in mostly high-end restaurants. And this one that you see on the bottom right is called Salicornia, or sea asparagus in short. Yeah, so this exists in nature, and it made me think, okay, could we then find something similar in our environment? Another interesting discovery we had was that very common vegetables like tomatoes and asparagus, certain varieties are able to tolerate some levels of salinity. And I found this in Netherlands. And I'll just show a very short video on what this experience was like.
The interesting thing is we test here plants, kill plants.
You kill plants.
Yeah.
And why do you kill plants?
We test as much plants as possible. We do that as much as possible. And then we can select the kind of crop that can grow under salt conditions.
Oh, yummy.
Then the interesting question is, are they edible? Are they nice? Tomatoes get a very nice taste.
So essentially, all these lines, you put different amounts of saline water in them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you just test as many plants as possible.
Yeah.
And you see what survives.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then these are the ones where potentially you can use to grow in different salt tolerant conditions all around the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
This is like too good to be true. I mean, I thought salt would just kill plants, but then I see so many plants growing that are thriving, and plants that I'm kind of familiar with, like there's leek over there,
Yeah, yeah,
kale,
yeah.
ooh la la, radish. I know this guy. I grew it in my garden too. Looks a bit sad though, like it's a bit yellow.
Yeah, they're they're not happy radishes, but they taste.
Oh my god, it's actually very sweet.
Yeah, it gets sweet.
Yeah, normally it's spicy and bitter.
Yeah,
No kidding, this is sweet. It's juicy.
yeah, yeah. So aromas gets bigger if they are grown on salt.
And like just an idea, like how much salt is in this pipe?
It starts with 6 till 8 daisy Siemens,
Decimans.
but it builds up. So in the end, if I don't get enough fresh water,
Yeah.
then it's 20 till 22. Then they all die.
Yeah, so just in context, like seawater is maybe about 30, 36 decisiemens. So he feeds like 25% of saltwater salinity. But it was really a very interesting experience because it truly was like very, very tasty, the vegetables that he grew, even though they didn't look too happy. Yeah, so on the aquaculture side, one thing I've learned from the conservationists and marine scientists was that generally a big issue with the way we are consuming food in the sea is that we are like eating the higher trophic levels, or like think of like a food chain, and we're eating the lions or the eagles that control the general population. So what we should be doing when we do farming, we should be considering growing and consuming more of the lower trophic stuff, like the micro or macro algae, basically like seaweed or sea grapes, shellfish, and like smaller fish that feed on these organisms. And another concept is about integrating all the different marine organisms in the different trophic levels, where one the output of one level could be the input of another. Yeah, so I will do the explaining. This professor that we interviewed will do the explaining, but this was in Portugal, and they had a closed integrated multitrophic aquaculture system, or IMTA in short.
You know, we got an amazing setup here. Could you share a little bit more about this IMTA system?
Yes, so IMTA is kind of an empty sheet, like when you're preparing your music. So you can pretty much put anything into it, but at the end it must be harmonious and works good. We are farming our fish here and we are feeding them, but they will not eat all the feed that we provide. There will also be some excretion. And those nutrients, either you let them go away from your system, or you try to put more species in the system that can uptake those nutrients. Particulate organic matter, dissolved organic matter, inorganic nutrients dissolved in the water. You know what species do what. This is why ecology is so important.
The basic resource of energy in this system is from two parts. One is the nutrition originally in lagoon. The other is the things you put to feed on the fish.
Yes. This is why you need to know the trophic webs and the flow of nutrients in productive areas like estuaries, coastal lagoons, even coral reefs. And you get inspired from them, and then you try to mimic that in the IMTA.
So most commercial aquaculture systems are only growing one or two things, and it's very inefficient. So this IMTA system replicates nature and has multi-layers in it.
You can look at nature and try to replicate the processes that nature has perfected and developed innovative ways to do aquaculture. So you maximize the production without hurting the environment. And that's the way to go.
Yeah.
So this system that they did, every single tank had something different growing. So there was everything from seaweed to worms to dragon, seahorses. And they managed to crack like the circularity of it. So it was pretty much feeding off one another, but this is what we call a closed system. So that was one of the big inspirations that it was possible. So now going into the actual project and how we came up with some of the concepts. Firstly, I figured that we didn't know what the eventual farm was going to look like in a commercial scale. So having something very flexible would be very helpful. So I got the inspiration from like how molecules bind together and how they release, and similar to like modules or capsules on the International Space Station when they can lock on and be removed, and maybe there can be individual sub modules that can be attached to these bigger modules. In terms of the agriculture, what I had in mind was the vegetables had to float. And it would be, we could either put it on the main platform, but that would mean that we are sort of wasting the precious real estate, or we could maybe like let them float on a lower there's a lighter module or lighter system. And each agriculture module could have a water reservoir to store water. The substrate or like the soil's equivalent material could also be utilizing, we use this NTU created technology. It was a moisture retention gel. So you don't have to water it as often. And then thirdly, the crops that we choose would be similar to like what we experienced in Europe. Like Portulaca was one of these very, very strong salt-tolerant crops that existed in the tropics. For the aquaculture side of it, we wanted, I mean, my dream, knowing that farming or aquaculture, the biggest cost is in the feed. So if there was a way to like grow the feed at no cost, that would be ideal. And then every single component could feed the other component. So the grand vision was to grow like a herbivorous fish called a real herbivorous fish called rabbit fish, and then seaweed will be the main biomass that we can grow. And literally you don't need anything because there's light that's free, and then the nutrients in the sea is free, and you can propagate the seaweed, you can keep multiplying it, and then everything is from that seaweed. Yeah, so that was like the dream. Okay, so the launch site, we tried to explore doing the floating farm in Singapore. Unfortunately, there's a lot of hurdles with sea space and regulatory hurdles. So we found someone who helped us identify a site in actual like seafaring community. So this is in Sabah, in Malaysia. And this site is very nice. It's like considered the Maldives of Asia, Southeast Asia. So this was with like a family that was they have a little like homestay thing, and we could launch our prototype about 100 meters from shore. And some of the conditions there, it was along a main channel. So strong currents, the depth was about 3 to 5 meters, 3 to 6 meters, very sandy bottom. Around there was nothing much, like there's no corals in this particular area. There's a bit of seaweed, native seaweed close by, but not a lot of fish, like nothing much going on around there. Okay, so yeah, this will be like a quick summary of basically how we came up with the floating modules.
Spent days drawing up many different designs and conducting countless experiments.
Oh my god, it's like big plants. Look at that. Completely right. Oh man. Oh man. Okay, it's launch time. All right. Woohoo. So now I'll do the honors of simulating rain. Ooh, this one's like very, very, very salty water. Oh, I think 6 is the max. Even the meter can't take it. Let's see better it tastes like seawater. Ooh. I think the plants will definitely die. Can we launch? Hey, yeah. Sitting down. Oh, it is floating. Yeah, it's really stable too. Oh, but if I press it on this side, water does seep in into the corner.
Then don't press on that side.
Yay! Not perfect, but that's what prototypes are for.
From pen to paper, ideation to fabrication, we've refined our design over and over again. And now we're ready for the next big step.
Yes.
Actual construction of our floating farm. Over the last 2 months, Atan and his team have been busy bringing our design to life. Project Castaway is made up of 5 floating pods and 6 floating lines. Pod 1 is a sheltered workspace kept afloat by 17 plastic barrels. It can support 2 tons in weight. Pods 2 to 5 are identical aquaculture modules where we intend to cultivate rabbitfish, lobsters, sea cucumbers, and oysters. We also intend to grow seaweed, sea grapes, sweet potato leaves, and portulaca. These will be planted along 6 by 15 meter floating lines. 3 of them will face the open sea, while the other 3 will be between the pods and the shoreline. I may be quite idealistic, but I'm hoping that the entire system can be as self-sufficient as possible. So starting with the macroalgae in the form of seaweed and sea grapes, these form the base of the system and the engine that powers everything else. Above water, the seaweed becomes fertilizers for the crops. Below water, it feeds the herbivorous rabbitfish. The waste of the rabbitfish then becomes food for the oysters and sea cucumbers. Every single member of the system, including the seaweed and sea grapes, can be consumed fresh or processed into other food products.
So this is an aquaculture pod. So where I'm standing is where the fish and lobsters will be. And this is complete. In fact, all 4 of them are complete already. And so is the main superstructure. So, what's left for us is really to reassemble it back in the sea and forming the complete platform.
Yep, so that's what it looks like. Okay, so what happened was then we then built and launched it, and we basically did a launch party, invited people in the community. And then of course we got the fish and lobsters and all that, and then we basically handed over to the community. We were not able to like spend time to observe how the system went, and we just got a couple of updates from them. But so from this point onwards, I'll just share like a lot of the learnings and thoughts about the whole concept of building a floating farm, including the challenges that we faced. So firstly, I just want to say that it was very difficult when, like, I think coming from Singapore, we thought, you know, we could design something and then create a global solution. But it wasn't the case because it was very different. Like, firstly, the user in Semporna would be completely different from a user in Singapore. Access to materials and all that was also very, very different. One of the biggest challenges we faced was that there was no it was very challenging to get the source of all the live marine creatures we wanted. So Semporna doesn't have like a aquaculture industry. Everything that they catch is from the wild. And you know, we wanted to look for like baby fish or like this say rabbit fish, right? But we couldn't find that. So we had to go and get someone to go and fish for them. So in a commercial scale, like that was like it's basically not very ideal because like you're catching the wild fish and then you need to catch more wild stuff. Yeah, so that wasn't great. But there was a limitation we had there. There also wasn't any like research institute looking at, you know, very more advanced kind of or climate adaptive crops or marine creatures. So we were limited to kind of the plants that we could find in the local garden nursery. Portulaca happens to be an ornamental plant that is also edible. But yeah, that is something that is lacking. Like, you know, in Netherlands, like Mark has been trawling like thousands of plants and killing all of them before maybe a small percentage of them survive. So yeah, basically the inputs to our system in Semporna was challenging. I realized you need a whole ecosystem of upstream and downstream people to support any project like this. Secondly, the floating infrastructure is very expensive. So for our whole project, the largest cost was the wood and the logistics to bring that over to the location. Manpower was also quite expensive. And you would think like, hey, you know, it's in Malaysia, things are more affordable. But because of the location where Semporna is, like, you need to take multiple forms of transport to get there. You need to take like other than planes, lorries, you need to take 2 boats, and each time you do that there's significant costs involved. Everything that's marine grade is expensive, so the wood we use a local wood called ironwood, and it was very, very expensive. So yeah, just that small platform was, you can imagine, like 10,000 Sing dollars just for material costs. And those who run floating like kelongs or fish farms would know that anything marine grade is expensive, even like the HDPE plastic that you would use for your structure. That's also very expensive. And we couldn't ship in other stuff because the cost of shipping in was more expensive, yeah, than actually buying stuff locally. Yeah, and there's something to consider if like we're doing this as sort of a you know, a TV show, but like on a practical level, if you cannot guarantee a return on investment, the fishermen would not do it. Yeah, they would not continue operating whatever project that even you give to them. It just doesn't make sense for them. And then how about the IMTA system that I really wish to incorporate? Out in open sea, there were just so many unknowns, right? We realized that we had no idea how the current was flowing and how the nutrients would move. We didn't have data or any sort of hydrological simulation of nutrient flows and how tides affect these flows. And at one time, you know, we tried to do like 10 different things, and it was very challenging trying to guess or predict how the flows of nutrients or feed would affect one another. Yeah, so IMTA was, I think, that is probably why in doing my research it hasn't really taken off, because there's just too many variables, and it's hard to do, like, imagine if you're feeding one thing and most of it is leaking away. Yeah, again, it's just a cost issue. And there's a constant tension between accumulating biodiversity and cleaning them. So again, on one hand, I really like nature-based solutions where, you like attracting biodiversity. Technically, you could attract certain wild species of marine life, and then you could probably fish or forage them. I also thought, what all these things you see, like we call it biofouling, things that stick on your material over time, we could technically harvest that and turn that into feed or fertilizers for the crops. But then as a fisherman or someone who farms oysters, you realize that is your enemy, because, it affects your yield of your oysters or some of your marine life. And in Japan, we actually visited a oyster farmer who designed a system similar to this called a flip farm, where half of the cage is exposed to air, so it sort of dries out all the biofouling, so the maintenance is very low. Yeah, so like I think this is more of a philosophical thing of, do we want to attract biodiversity? Do we not want to attract it? Yeah, it was not an easy thing to solve. Cultural factors, yeah. I mean, ultimately, there has to be a very strong incentive for people to take on a project and maintain it, because the cost of going out there is not easy. Once we launched it, we realized how like laborious it is to maintain, maybe like even feed the fish. You have so many things to feed, knots to tie. So yeah, all this is time, and time is money, and it was very challenging to convince the fishermen to make it work. Okay, so the conclusion that I experienced is that actually floating farm technologies do exist, right? There's oil rigs. Singapore has floating fish farms that, they filter the water. They have water tanks in there, filter the water, and it's in a sort of a closed system. But the thing is, like, with this whole Sampona experience, is like millions and millions of people in the coastal communities, they live a completely different life. They have like completely different access to materials, technologies. Everything is very rudimentary. And yeah, they just don't have the same sort of resources that we do. So my analysis of the whole situation of floating farms is that it's a nice idea, but we just need to be mindful that we don't like just over engineer things for the sake of engineering things. And it might be great to do it in a country that has financial resources to do it, but is it actually practical and scalable in a low cost manner? And I think from this project, I realized I haven't cracked the solution yet. And I do observe that like people living in these coastal communities, they have a low cost way of doing things, right? They just get, pieces of wood, string, nets, they tie things together. And very often, in terms of looking at costs, floating infrastructure, basically, if we can minimize not building it, that seems to be the solution. If we can maximize how we do stuff on land, that is the most cost-effective way to do things. So, for example, if a farmer who's growing rice experiences saline intrusion, maybe he can just convert to growing shrimp instead, right? Then he doesn't have to build like infrastructure, or build a floating farm, for example. Yeah, so that economics ultimately is the deal breaker here. Yeah, so that's all I have. So I think we can open up to questions.
Okay, I'm clapping for the muted. So thank you very much for this great overview that you gave. And before we move on to the Q&A part, I would like to briefly mention here that some of the people in the audience may not be SFSS or Society of Floating Solutions Singapore members. SFSS is a non-for-profit society based here in Singapore with international membership, and we are interested in discussing innovative floating structures to solve various social, economic, and environmental problems. So in case you're interested in what we are doing, I posted some of the links to our social media, to the website, and so on in the chat. And if you were to decide to join us and support our work, this is mainly, also to upkeep our website, our admin work, and so on. We are always happy to have new members. In the case of students, there's actually no membership fee. And some of the benefits that members receive are discounts on our activities, such as, for example, the forthcoming World Conference on Floating Solutions, which takes place this year on 1st to 3rd of September in Finland. Registration is still open, and in 2026, so next year in September, we will host the event in Singapore together with TCOMS, and registration and paper submission will open in the next months. This event usually serves to bring academics, people from industry, practitioners, regulators, and so on to cover together, and covers all types of floating structures and corresponding topics, from food production to energy generation to residential and commercial structures, marine and freshwater biology, social acceptance of structures, governance structures, and so on. So also please consider following us on LinkedIn and Eventbrite in case you are interested in our news and other activities. We also do sometimes site visits. For example, last year, talking here about food production, we visited the ACE Sustainable Fish Farm in Singapore. Yeah, so thank you very much again, Christopher. We can now open the Q&A session. Whoever wants to ask a question, either please post in the chat or preferably also in the Q&A box here. You can also use the raise hand function, and I will then call you up. I will also ask a couple of questions, but I think we start here with those questions from the audience first. And Christopher, I think you can also read if you want in the chat box. Let me check where the questions start. A lot of people thanking you, so I think you have read this already. So, one question from Charles: would land-based livestock be feasible to be cultivated on floating platforms on a large scale? I think, you can probably say something. I can also say something about it. So.
Yeah, Charles. So we actually, as part of the people that we were meeting, we actually visited something called the Floating Farm in Netherlands. They do raise cows on a floating platform in brackish water, so like close to basically in between freshwater and seawater. The cows actually have an area on land where they can graze, and then there's a bridge that they can move up on their own whenever they feel like into the floating platform. And then they have like different technologies that turn their waste into like pellets for gardening. Like energy and water is also circular. So yeah, I think it is definitely possible. Now it all just comes down to cost, right? So is it cheaper to have livestock on land where you don't need to spend millions of dollars building the platform? It's really answering that question, whether it's economical. But yeah, that was also something we considered. I wanted to put livestock on the platform, but it was just like operationally and cost-wise not very feasible.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the response. Our friends from the Netherlands are sleeping at this point in time. I think it's something like 4:40 a.m. in the morning. Otherwise, I'm sure some of them would have been here. And yeah, you mentioned this project, and I think chicken, for example, are also sometimes considered, for example. And if you are able to use the manure for other purposes, fertilizer and so on, I think this is one of the potential options here. So one of our council members, Prof. Tay, also has a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chris, for the wonderful presentation. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah,
Yes,
just want to
yes.
check. You mentioned that you're trying to deploy this in Singapore. Can we know that what are the challenges, and why do you decide to move away from Singapore when you try to test bed this?
I think it's very just practical challenges. So like, firstly, trying to get the permits to do it was difficult because it covers like food farming, right? So SFA would have to be involved and MPA, and so they need some form of proof of what you're doing. And I think we were doing something for the first time. We don't have proof. We don't have evidence of how much like waste this system will produce. So yeah, we just don't have data, so we cannot apply for permits, and we have no idea how long it will take. Just to remember, this is again like a filming project, so it's not a prop like a research project or anything. So we literally have 1 year from start to finish, and we can't spend like half a year waiting for permits. Another thing was like cost. So just to rent, say, a boat to bring out equipment to a site in St. John's Island would cost like $1,500 per trip. So, you know, if we have to do like multiple trips, like yeah, there goes the money, just renting a boat just to bring out some stuff. Yeah, so just very practical reasons of not being able to do it as a
Do you see
prototype
that they
project.
are okay? Thank you for reply. Do you see that they are encouraging this kind of innovative solutions for floating farming out in the sea for
Sorry.
Singapore, for SFA?
Oh, yeah, they are. Yeah, they are like with the new tenders. From what I know, they are looking at basically similar sort of floating farms to the ArcPad. Sorry, not ArcPad. The can't remember the name, but yeah, they're looking at, you know, farms that have a closed system that float, can filter the water. Yeah, but yeah, I guess this project was a lot more complex, so it wasn't. Basically, it would have taken too long, I think, and to be too expensive to try to do it. But yeah, I think overall Singapore is always looking at ways to improve technologies in their aquaculture systems.
Okay.
Yes, thanks, Imran. EcoArc.
Yeah, thanks. Are you looking at continuing this project with local institution?
No, unfortunately not. The series is over, so our yeah project is over, so not anymore.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. We have now a variety of questions. I think we do one more here from those people who ask in person, and then we go back to the chat and to the Q&A box. So Ibnu, please go ahead and ask.
Thanks so much, Chris. You hear my voice?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. With regards to the plants that you were growing on at Samporna, what are they, and did they survive the 3 or 4 weeks after the planting? How were the yield like? Did they burn because of the heat is just too strong, or the waves are just too much that they don't like too much vibrations? I'm curious how the yield like.
Yeah. Thanks, Ibner. So Ibner was also one of the profiles we featured because he's doing a research in floating modules that grow vegetables in fresh water. So we got inspiration from him as well. So the main crops that we chose were sweet potato leaves and portulaca. So portulaca is a succulent, so similar family to like cacti. So what happened was after we put the plants in a couple of hours, the waves were so big that it tilted so much, sometimes almost like 90 degrees, that all the water in the reservoir actually like spilled out. So the plants were very, very dehydrated very quickly. And then the wind out there was so strong. So within a day, all the leaves of the sweet potato leaves were getting shredded. So I think the longest it survived we saw was we were there for that period, not for too long, but for about the 5th day where we were about to leave. I think it was like almost on the verge of giving up for the sweet potato leaves. The portulaca was generally a lot more resilient. So when we left, it would still survive for another like 2 weeks or so. Yeah, it could survive for a long time. But the thing is, back to like I realized this whole more of a fundamental consideration, which is what we were doing was trying to grow stuff that could survive, but it didn't grow stuff for profitability or to thrive, which is what is really needed in a floating system or in a farming system. Yeah, so it was a totally different context and it barely survived. Yeah. And I thought, how can we make it better? Definitely having a more robust float system where it can stabilize or move it higher to from the water, that would help. But again, this is a lot of costs and yeah, the vegetables are very affordable in a place like Malaysia. So it just didn't make sense for the farmers to grow them.
Yeah, thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thank you. I think we can go back to the chat here. There's a question from Zender Ko. Thanks so much for the sharing. I was wondering, since you mentioned Singapore has a lot of issues with sea space, wouldn't establishing overseas floating farms in Malaysia and Southeast Asia still leave Singapore reliant on overseas imports for food? Or are the farms still considered to be local?
Yeah, I think I mean, just to clarify, like the objective, we wanted to do it in Singapore, but we couldn't do this prototype. We had issues, so that's why we did it in Sampona. But I mean, the big dream was always to make it a global solution so that people in different communities around the world could use it. Yeah. So I think the main thing is that we weren't trying to grow in Malaysia and import it back to Singapore. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can follow up on this. Some people would say, but this is maybe not the case for your project, that if you have a fish farm somewhere in Southeast Asia and you have another event like COVID, for example, and you have a food crisis coming up, you would be able to relocate this farm to Singapore because it's floating. So I wonder how seagoing would your farm have been? Would it have been possible to move it from Sabah to Singapore, or is this too? I mean, given that this was only one farm, I mean, economically, it probably wouldn't have been the thing to do, but generally, I mean, is this feasible at all?
I think it actually might be feasible because when we were doing our research phase, we were even exploring like towing some structures from a nearby fish farm and then using that. So yeah, I think it would be possible for a towing situation actually. Yeah.
Okay, this also then brings up the question, if this would happen, how do the locals react to it? And also the question of the ownership. But I mean, this is all very interesting questions that really depend on the local situation, I think. So we can jump to the Q&A box. There's a question from James Yin. Have you come across limited IMTA work in a semi-closed environment that has worked? For example, rice with crawfish, fish in a fruit tree plantation, and so on.
Yeah, definitely. That's called like yeah, there's another name for this, but definitely like people do ducks and rice or ducks, snails and rice, fish and rice. So definitely in a more closed environment. Basically, if it's closed, you can control it. I think that makes a big difference. Yeah. So definitely in agriculture, it's quite common to integrate aquaculture or uh yeah, not marine, like aquatic animals and terrestrial animals or terrestrial crops, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Then a question here in the chat from Howard Tang. Wondering what's the key challenge or challenges of adopting this solution in Singapore? Is farming density a key concern? You already talked a bit about that, but maybe you can say something also about the issue of density and so on.
Yeah, I think the biggest is actually Singapore. The main issue is cost. That is because like the farmers even now even in Kelongs where it's fairly low cost to produce food, they already have challenges selling it. It's still too expensive. So with more automation and more equipment, more infrastructure, it would cost even more to produce the the livestock. So it is, if you cannot sell it, then that is the main issue. Farming density is not so much an issue, I think. Just on a side note, like myself and a few other people have worked on a conceptual project to do sort of our own version of the Long Island. So like exploring turning East Coast Park into a floating farm development, and I can put the link here shortly. Yeah, so it was, there's going to be in that module like a chicken farm, vegetable farm. Yeah, but it is assuming that it is we can sell all the things that we produce, and assuming we have many assumptions like there's no more petroleum because in 100 years maybe we cannot extract petroleum, and we cannot import food anymore. So yeah, until we reset or we have these constraints, it is just like not practical to do it in Singapore at this point of time.
Okay, thank you. Then we go on here in the chat from Leah Gilling. The model you showed, how much did it cost? You said it is costly. Can you give us a ballpark figure?
Yeah, ballpark figure is about 25 grand just for materials and the livestock, Sing dollars.
Okay. Yeah, I was also thinking in terms of what you mentioned about the problems of bringing potential construction materials to the actual site. Was it ever a consideration to build the farm somewhere else and then tow it to the destination so that you could reduce the costs if you were able to mass produce, so to speak, at one destination and then move it to certain sites? Would this be an option to bring the costs down?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. If we produce like maybe somewhere in Malaysia or Sampona and then in bulk, yeah, potentially. But yeah, I was surprised how expensive it is to move stuff around in Sampona. And also like depending on the boat sizes. So once you expand out of a certain size, you need to get like the much larger boats, and then you need to get like barges, and then to get the labor and equipment to support those boats are like astronomical. So it's like thousands of dollars to rent those boats per trip. Yeah.
Thank you. May I also ask one of my questions here? So I mean, this project was for a limited time only, so I presume not too many problems with, for example, parasites or diseases and so on came up. But let's say, since you have a multi-trophic system, if one species would actually get problems, I mean, there's some possibilities for controlling this, but let's say you get severely hit on a low trophic level, what would be the impacts on the higher trophic levels? Can you balance this somehow out, which also seems difficult since you mentioned there are not really any hatcheries available, or what would it mean in terms of risk assessments for the operators?
Yeah, 100%. That's a very, very important question. And the truth is, if that is the only species feeding the other species, there is no backup, then that would be a problem. Like the other species would not have food. So that is the biggest risk of an integrated multitrophic system not working out. But in some of the like conceptual designs, we were just also hoping that, if there was a bit more biodiversity and buffers, like allowing like a lot more wild species to come in and integrating the wild and the farmed or cultivated, that would be interesting. Like we could set up traps for crabs and things like that. Yeah, so they come and go instead of a very intensive monoculture in a certain net. Yeah, but this is yeah, very, very difficult basically to control so many things at once.
Okay, thank you. And one question that I also want to ask, because I think some people would be interested in that, the impact of water pollution. So urban settings wherever you are usually more polluted than our non-urban settings. There are some exceptions to that, but generally, I mean, there's an issue, especially when we talk about port situations. So there are also options, I think, to filter the water using certain species, but then you usually would not want to have these species in the food chain. So were there any experiments regarding this issue, or did you talk to some experts about pollution topics?
Yeah, so the thing is you wouldn't wanna put like filter feeders in a place that is polluted, and then you wouldn't for your consumption. So I mean the filter feeders do a great job filter feeding, but then if it's there to filter feed, and maybe that can be your nature-based solution just to clean the water, that's fine. But then you don't want to put it there to eat it, and you also it sort of doesn't make sense to try to clean the water and then put more oysters for consumption, because then there might not be enough. There's you don't want to consume too much food that there is not enough food for the system. Yeah, so that is the constraint. So I think in reality, like checking the water quality and making sure that it's safe is probably like the most important criteria, whether or not this platform can be used. Yeah, so what we realized is throughout this project, it's super geographical specific. Even moving your platform like 1 meter makes a big difference, because the tides, the sediments, all that changes. And I never really thought about it, because in land-based farming we have this concept of like regenerative farming, turning things into food forests. So I could literally like start planting trees, and over time it would become a secondary rainforest. And all these could be fruit trees, for example. But it didn't work in the sea like that, because if the area doesn't have corals, you can't try to force corals there. There are no corals because geographically it doesn't exist in a spot where there's enough food for the corals. So this concept would only work in very specific areas that allow it to, where there's enough nutrients, there's enough sediments, the currents offer that circulation. Yeah, so it is very specific.
Thank you. And if I can ask a question that I think a lot of people, when we're talking about the Singaporean situation, would also be interested in, what did you learn from this project that can be applied to farming on land, be that rooftop farming, be that other forms of farming that could be applicable in Singapore that are taking place on land? Was there any interesting lessons that you can actually use to bring back to land, so to speak?
Yeah. I I think for me it was not so much about the like specific methods or topics. I think I realized that everything has to go down to like a first principles concept. So I know it's a bit off tangent, but like I really love the idea of floating farms until when I came down to the nitty-gritty of it, and I realized, oh, actually, a lot of it isn't very practical, is it? Yeah, so, and a lot of it is also like governance, who has the decision to create an industry, to build things, to zone the land, to do these things. And that seemed to be more impactful than actually the growing systems, because you know you can't just do it. You need like researchers to be working on things, different species. You need engineers to be being able to maintain your system when it breaks down or something goes bad. Yeah. So until you have all that, like it just, yeah, basically it really needs a whole ecosystem of people to make it work. And then it must totally make sense in that geography. So I think just being very pragmatic was my conclusion, and how it applies to farming in general, or urban development in general. Yeah, is the lesson I've learned.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me check here. Also to the audience, if you have any more pressing questions, then please post or raise your hand. This is all here. Okay, I think yeah, some more people thanking you here in the chat. And you also posted the link to the East Coast Park floating farm concept. So everybody who's interested, click on it so that you have it before this closes here. I think you answered all the questions that people had. So since it's also, I think, getting a bit late in North America, we can end it here. And let me thank you once more for this wonderful presentation and informative project. It will be interesting to find out how it developed with the local community, if they were able to make some refinements, or if we have a similar situation like here in Singapore, where you can read once or twice a year in the Straits Times how many kelongs went bankrupt and so on. I mean, it's realistically one of the problems, the costs, as you mentioned. Yeah, and also once again, if you're interested, there are the 3 episodes, but there are also multiple more episodes that are not on floating structures, but generally on farming with the Channel News Asia documentaries. So check this out. And yeah, thanks again, Christopher. Thanks again, everybody who joined here. And I leave this open 1-2 more minutes. People are thanking you. And then I think later we can follow up via email. And also just to mention, yeah, if you're interested in society work, then please check out our website and social media.